Good morning. Today is March 26, 2023, and we welcome you to New York Buddhist Church's RENNYO SHONIN Memorial Service, streamed live on YouTube and Facebook. We will begin with quiet sitting. Sit up straight, feet flat on the floor. Gently calm your mind and follow your breath. Today's Sutra trait is Juseige on page 54. Our Gobunsho is Shonin Ichiru no Sho on pages 127. Pardon me. Followed by Vandana and Tisarana on page 7. A meditative reading, Ryogemon on page 3. Reverend Gary Jobo Jaskula will be sharing today's Dharma message. We will conclude the service by singing Gathas, Ondokusan 2, and Nembutsu on pages 137 and 135. Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu. Juseige is on page 54 of your service books. Today's Gobunsho, the letters of RENNYO Shonin, will be Shonin Ichiryu no Sho. You can read. I'll read first the English translation, and then do the traditional reading in Japanese. And when we are in training and we hear the Gobunsho, we're told to lower our heads and listen carefully, because the words of RENNYO are written to give us insight into the teachings. And these were letters written by RENNYO to his followers to clarify for them the meaning of Namo Amida Butsu that we learned from Shinran Shonin. So this Gobunsho, Shonin Ichiryu no Sho, is fittingly called the tradition of Shinran Shonin. What is taught in the tradition of Shinran Shonin is that the entrusting heart is essential. For when we abandon various practices and take refuge in Amida with singleness of heart, our birth in the Pure Land is settled by the Buddha through the inconceivable vow power. The state we thus attain is described as, with awakening of a single thought of entrusting, we join those who are in the stage of the truly settled. Recitation of the Nembutsu thereafter should be understood to be the Nembutsu as an expression of gratitude for the Tathagata's benevolence for settling our birth in the Pure Land, humbly and respectfully. Shonin Ichiryu no gokanke no momuki wa shinjin no motte honto serare soro. Sono yue wa moro moro no zogyo no nage sutete ishin ni mira ni kimyo sureba fukashigi no ganriki to shite button no kata yori ojo wa jijo seshime tamo Sono korai yo ichinen poki nyu shoujo shiju tamo shakushi. Sono ue no shomyo nembutta nyorai wa gojo sarame tamaishi. Go on hoji no nembuto Kokoro Bekinari Anakashiko Namondatsu. Everyone now please rise for Vandana and Tisarana.
Namo tassa bhagavato
now have the reading of Ryogemon. The reading of Ryogemon, which is on page 3 of your service books.
We'll first read the Creed in English. It's on page 4. And then we'll read the Ryogemon on page 3 in Japanese. Let's read the Creed number 1 together. We rely upon Amida Tathagata with our whole heart for the enlightenment in the life to come, abstaining from all sundry practices and teachings, and giving up the trust in our limited self. We believe that the assurance of birth comes at the very moment we entrust, and we call the name Namo Amida Butsu in joy and gratitude for the Buddha's compassion. We also acknowledge gratefully the benign benevolence of our founder and the succeeding masters who have led us to believe in this profound teaching. And we do now endeavor to follow throughout our lives the way laid down for us. Let's read the Japanese on page 3. Ryogemon. Moro moro no zogyo zashu, jiriki no kokoro o furi sutete, isshin ni amida nyorai, warera ga kondo no ichidaiji no gosho, on tasuke sorai to tanomi moshite soro, tanomu ichinen no toki, Ojo ichijo on tasuke chijo tozonji. Kono ue no shomyo wa gon hosha tozonji yorokobi mo shisoro. Kono on kotowari chomon mo shiwake soro koto. Gokai san shonin go shusse no gon. Shidai sojo no zen jishiki no asa kara zaru gokanke no goon to arigataku zonji soro. Kono ue wa sadame okaseraruru on okite. Ichigo o kagiri mamori mo subeku soro. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo.
I'm now pleased to welcome my fellow minister's assistant, Reverend Gary Shobo Jaskula, to deliver today's Dharma message.
So good morning, everyone. Good morning. And welcome on this beautiful spring day to the New York Buddhist Church. And we are observing today the RENNYO SHONIN Memorial Service. It's a day that we like to set aside to remember the second founder of Jodo Shinshu, RENNYO SHONIN, and he's over there. That's his picture on that side. And I just want to get his dates out of the way immediately. He was born in 1415 and he died in 1499. He was the 8th Monshu, the 8th abbot of the Honganji. And he lived in the tumultuous 15th century in Japan. It was also tumultuous in the West at the same time, so these things ripple out. But in any event, in Japan, it was famous as the warring period. It was a time of great social unrest. Peasants were revolting, warlords were fighting each other, the emperor was already out. It was the time of shoguns and various ones duking it out in the field. You know, if everyone's watched those samurai movies, this is the time for that. And RENNYO was right in there. He's involved in all of that. But he has been sort of, because he is such a institutional figure in Jodo Shinshu, he was like not forgotten, but he was taken for granted for a long time. You know, in the early 20th century, there was this back to Shinran school, and of course Shinran is the great teacher of our denomination, and his teaching is very nuanced about other power and self-power and different aspects of the doctrine that he received from Honin and the other 7 masters. And Shinran, by the time RENNYO shows up, you know, this is 7 people later, 8 people later actually. That was all set in certain minds, but Honganji, our mother temple, was not the player that you might think it was. Honganji was a small temple. It had some followers, mostly where Shinran spoke centuries before. But the Shinshu was big, but not Honganji. There are 10 schools of Shinshu. And today, it's like, well, Yishi Honganji and these other little ones. But then, it was the opposite. Honganji had sort of become, how should I say, not degenerate, but quiescent. It was living sort of a half-life. It's nominally under Tendai oversight, but within it, there was a strong Jodo Shinshu teaching, but it was poor. You know, they had the mausoleum of Shinran and the temple Honganji, but it was founded by Eshini and the Shinran's family and the early founders. But when RENNYO comes in, they're basically poor. They're going from hand to mouth. And RENNYO, rather, often would have nothing to eat for a couple of days. He was not the Manchu's, his father's, he was his son, but by a concubine mother. And for various political reasons, the father took a different wife and sent the concubine away, RENNYO's mother, and he was around 6 years old at the time. And this really hurt RENNYO. But he continued to be not the successor sounds too much like the British royal family. But he was being formed by his father and the community at the time. And he studied very, very hard, even though the evil stepmother, which is another trope that we might not want, but there it is in the story, tries to push him out in favor of her own son. But the father never lets go of Renyo, and does in fact train him. And he studies really hard, apparently. All this writings he studies Tendai as they still do today, Manchus, when they go, little baby Manchus, when they go to they go to a Tendai temple, and also all the writings of Shinran and the previous Manchus. Renyo was the master of all of that by the time he was 19 years old. And his dad sent him out to the provinces, to the dependent temples and the groups of followers to visit them, acting on his father's behalf, and he sends writings. Renyo is famous for sending writings to, and does this throughout his life, to the other temples and little sanghas and Dharma gatherings that are out there. And he starts this really early on. And so when the dad passes, Renyo is at first overlooked by the family, but then it becomes clear to them that he's really the one that is ready for this job, and they give it to him. But Renyo, already, age 19, had felt that Honganji should be a much stronger place in the Jodo Shinshu milieu of the time, which it wasn't. It was like a secondary temple, but it had the grave of Shinran, and it had the family of Shinran, and there was generally this feeling by Renyo that he should be, not he, but the Honganji should be more important. And that's what Renyo dedicated his life to do. And it's a very long and complex story, and I'm not going to tell it. I'm just going to highlight a couple of the things he did, because immediately he starts to observe Hoonko, Shinran's memorial, and this pisses off the Tendai establishment in Mount Hiei. They don't. You have to remember that from the time of Shinran, in many places, Nembutsu teachings are considered heretical and illegal, banned by the emperor. And they all thought this was all solved by having Tendai sort of stewardship of the Honganji. But so when Renyo comes out and starts observing Shinran's Hoonko, which is our main feast in our tradition now, this set off a bomb. And one of the things that happened is that, they sent an army. It's complicated. It's very complicated, but basically what happens is that an army from Mount Hiei comes down and burns the place down. And Renyo has to pack up and move out and re-establish the Honganji at a place called Yoshisaki. And this was a really big event, because what happened was, he's already started teaching, he's already started reaching out to other communities, trying to form strategic alliances, doing the things that he became famous for. But this move to Yoshisaki surprised Renyo, because people from all over the country packed up and moved there. They followed him into what was like the exile to the boonies, like going to Utah or whatever, and that's where a lot of what Renyo does starts, and it doesn't end there. That place is attacked. Eventually, he moves to Osaka, the castle there, and eventually the Honganji moves back to Kyoto, where it is today. And it was not divided into two parts at that time. It was just one temple. But so that's the broad outline, and that's very, very, very short. It's a really complicated story. If you like medieval history, this might be fun to read. There's a lot of treatises out there since the 90s when RENNYO had his 500th anniversary. I can give you some, or you can ask about them. I'll recommend them. But in any event, RENNYO did certain things. He was this extraordinary personality, very vigorous. For one thing, he had 27 children, and he loved them all. He had 5 wives, all of whom predeceased him, one after the other. You know, they were not, because it's very cynical. Sometimes you can look at this and say, oh, he's strategically marrying. But actually, RENNYO seems to have genuinely loved his wives. He loved women in particular. He loved, he wanted them to be spiritual leaders, as, you know, Shinran kind of, and as Shini had set the stage, but it wasn't realized. And although it probably wasn't truly realized in Japan until recently, or even now it's struggling, RENNYO is who you can use as your precedent when you're trying to correct some historic wrongs. And he married the children, the ones that didn't die, into other temples, and drew other temples into the Honganji orbit. So these would have been temples of other traditions like Zen or Tendai or Shingon at one time, perhaps, that joined up with Jodo Shinshu, or they were other Jodo Shinshu temples that were sort of out there and not affiliated. They networked with RENNYO, and he got his kids in all of these places. And this is the backbone of today's Honganji organization, which is quite different in, you know, what we think of as Buddhism, which is usually monastic. This was really sort of a feudal arrangement that they had, except that RENNYO was a total egalitarian. His personality was, so he is the one who revised the liturgy, as you know. He's the one who we chant Shoshinge, we chant Amida Kyo, we chant the Wasan. RENNYO was the one who set that schedule, set that liturgy, and that's what we still follow now. So even today, the service we just heard, that is RENNYO's service, and we still follow it today. And so RENNYO was this really wild guy. And, you know, there are articles that talk about, you know, Shinran in Japan is revered as like a living, or was a Buddha. He is Shinran Shonin, he's called. Well, RENNYO is Shonin too, but in Japan, he's remembered more fondly as RENNYO-san, just RENNYO-san. And he's the one who made sure that the Naijin was at the same level. I mean, here it's raised a little bit because we're in the West, but we sit down and we have to look up. But in Japan, it's really on the same floor level as the Gaijin. And when he met with ordinary people, which he was very fond of doing, he sat at exactly their level, not higher. And that's why people loved him, you know. And he really had a way of engaging with ordinary people. And I'm going to read some stuff, and you'll see why, I think. There's a story of RENNYO Shonin who had a conversation with an elderly man. He was an old, ardent Jodo Shinshu follower. He got so forgetful that he could not remember many stories he had heard about the Buddha, and he was feeling very sorry for himself. And one day he told this to RENNYO. He said, "RENNYO-san, my mind is like putting water in a basket. Even if I hear a wonderful sermon, I can't remember anything about it. It makes me very miserable and sad." RENNYO Shonin answered, "In that case, then put your basket in the water. Put yourself in the Buddha Dharma." That's the kind of thing RENNYO is famous for. We heard the Gobunsho just now, and we heard the Ryogemon, which is associated with RENNYO. RENNYO really wants you to rely on gratitude. It's not this intellectual thing. Though he was a great studier and did not despise studies at all. But he really, in the end, he wanted you just to immerse yourself in the Dharma and to use the Sangha as your refuge. He was very good for that. He really, really wanted people to use the Sangha, he didn't want Jodo Shinshu people to argue with other religions or other sects of Buddhism. The Sangha was where you could come and ask your questions. And also the Sangha was a place where you took care of each other and you could be yourself. And this really spoke to what was then the modern spirit emerging out of medieval Japan. So it becomes a sect. And you could speak to RENNYO directly. And it's important to acquire the knowledge of the Buddha Dharma, but studying for RENNYO was not the only way, because the essential thing is missed. We have something in our tradition through RENNYO too, called Mampo, which means listening to the Dharma. And so even if we forget a teaching because of old age, Amida will grasp us and never let us go, never abandon us. Amida is like the water that you put the basket in, surrounding us at all times with wisdom and compassion. And that's the true meaning of Mampo, to hear the truth. And so it isn't whether you can articulate it back. You can listen to the things and get something, hopefully you will. But it's immersing yourself. I want to tell you another story of RENNYO. This one is related by Professor Alfred Bloom. And have you ever heard of the Zen teacher Ikkyu? Many people have. Ikkyu was contemporary with RENNYO. And Ikkyu is another one of these beloved figures in Japan. He was a very high abbot Zen teacher. But he and RENNYO were kind of mavericks in their way, and they connected with people on a very deep level. But this is a story about Ikkyu and RENNYO-san. In Kyoto, there was a very famous pine tree called very tortuous or spiral pine. So it had been. It's an old pine tree, and it had been bent over and is all gnarly on the rock. And Ikkyu put up a sign in front of the pine tree which announced, I am going to give a great sum of gold to the person who can see this pine tree in a straight way. Everyone tried to see how such a twisted tree could be seen straight. Some people thought that from some angle the tree could be seen straight. After some time, someone told RENNYO about the sign, and RENNYO, without seeing the tree, said he knew the answer and asked for the gold. Ikkyu said that on the reverse side of the board there was a warning: this is not valid for RENNYO. However, when they asked RENNYO for the answer, he replied, "The answer is very simple. The way to see this tree straight is to recognize it is twisted." And that really is a very profound teaching to us. That's the real come as you are. We have gnarls, we have issues, but we are the child of the Buddha, the object of the Buddha's compassion. And that was a good answer as far as Ikkyu was concerned. There was another one with Ikkyu. Apparently they jousted a lot. So Ikkyu, who was a tea guy, he was a tea master. Amida sends a verse to RENNYO saying, "Amida has no mercy, since Amida only saves those who say his name." And RENNYO answered the koan with a poem. "There is no heart far from Amida, but a covered bowl of water cannot reflect the moon." Often you hear in Buddhism, people, the moon shines in the lake. It's looking at that is the Dharma. The moon is the Dharma. Look at the Dharma, or pointing at the moon. Don't mistake the finger for the moon. So the fact that the moon is reflected into various places, RENNYO is saying that if your cup is covered, which they were, the moon can't reflect. So that was his joust back to RENNYO. Take that, RENNYO. Take that, Ikkyu. So that was wonderful. So RENNYO wrote lots of letters, and he wrote lots of copies, like hundreds, thousands, maybe even more than that, of Namo Amida Butsu, and gave them out. And a lot of these are very precious relics in Japan to this day. And we know about the Gobunsho, which we just read, with his 28 or 9 of them. They were more. But these were sent to the temples and the Dharma gatherings, the ko, the groups, and they kept them and enshrined them. And they were very basic. He didn't send them Kyogyo Shinsho and said, "Here, learn this, the test is on Thursday." He sent little letters, and they were easy to understand, and people kept them as objects of worship, actually. They would bring them out and read them to each other, and eventually they were collected, and we that's still part of our services today. And that's one of the things he did, but the letter writing is very important too. He really visited all the followers and encouraged them to visit him, and they did. People would come every year to Kyoto or wherever RENNYO was hanging out, wherever Honganji was presently on its journeys. They would find Renyo there and try to make a once a year, or every once in a while, if not every year, visit to Honganji. And that's still a custom today. And a beautiful one. And so that's the beginning of our tradition. So I'm going to read some more Renyo little teachings. Renyo famously said, "Even though we don't have spare time, we should listen to the Buddha Dharma. It is wrong to think that we listen to the Buddha Dharma only when we have spare time. The Buddha Dharma teaches us that we never know for sure we have tomorrow." Here's another one. "If one walks looking far ahead and pays no attention to the ground beneath one's feet, that person will stumble. If one gazes critically upon others and forgets to look at oneself, that person will bring tragedy on oneself." "The faults of others are easy to see, but our own faults are difficult to recognize. If one sees that he has a fault, he must realize that the fault must be very grave indeed for him to recognize it himself. Thus, he must take steps to correct his fault. Because it is difficult for us to see many of our faults, we should listen to the advice of others." So this is Renyo telling us to rely on the Sangha, that it's okay to have faults. But in Sangha, we can see sometimes our faults. We can see in other people the same faults we have, or sometimes they see things we don't see, and we realize that they're being kind to us anyway, just as the Buddha is. And that's a teaching. You know, if you just read the Gobunsho, it's sort of like you don't do anything. It all comes to you, which is, true enough in a certain way of reading. But that isn't Shinran's understanding, and neither, if these sayings are real, is it Rennyo's. He's very much, someone who is like, okay, you heard the doctrine, you heard the teaching, now live a good life. And that's a challenge for us even today. Here's another one. "There are those who listen to the teachings with the purpose of showing off their knowledge to others, but few are those who listen for the sake of attaining awakening. Those who hear that the Pure Land is a place of pleasure and thus desire rebirth there shall not attain supreme enlightenment. Only those who place their being in Amida Buddha shall attain Buddhahood." That's similar to putting your head in the water, in the basket, and immersing the basket in the water, right? Here's another one. "From the standpoint of endowed trust, one should listen to the teaching as if for the first time, even though one has heard it before. People want to hear new and interesting things all the time, but no matter how often one listens to the teaching, one should hear it as if it were a rare first occasion." And the last one I'll read is a sentence. Listen to the Buddha's teaching even if you must take time out from your other daily business. To believe that you will listen when you have some spare time is shallow thinking. There is no tomorrow in listening to the teaching. That's a similar version of one of the ones I read earlier. And I think, you can argue about Renyo. The scholars can talk about the fine points of his understanding and whether it is Shinran or not Shinran, or if it something like that. But I think it is Shinran. And it's this that makes Renyo, this is the best side of Renyo, these sayings, this attitude Renyo had. He had a hard life, and so he really associated, or he really bonded with ordinary people, and that's what we need ourselves. I think we are all ordinary people, and Renyo is showing us it's good to be here. Listen to the teaching. Put your head in it. If you don't remember or you screw it up, trying to explain it, don't worry. It's still there. And that's, I think, the essential thing for Renyo, for me anyway, and I hope for you. And so thank you for listening, and let us put our heads together, bow down, and in gratitude for the service of Renyo Shonin, may we love what he loved and always do as he taught. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. So thank you very much, and see you next time.
I hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you, Reverend Gary, for sharing with us the history and the insights, the spiritual insights that Renyo gained on his own journey of life. And I hope you find them inspiring and interesting. So we will now have our Gathas, which are Ondokusan and Namo Amida Butsu. Please rise.
Page 134.
Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Please be seated. Oh, it's so nice to see you all here today, and such a beautiful day, and you chose to spend it here. Thank you. So I'd like to invite anyone who's visiting for the first time to please stand up and introduce yourself so that we might greet you. Is there anyone here for the first time? Oh, Mark? Lily will give you the microphone. Yes, your name. Thank you. And Mark, how did you come to be here today? We're so pleased that you could come today. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there anyone else? Okay. Well, we always hope that new members, new people joining us will become old friends in short order. You're always welcome to join us at New York Buddhist Church. For those who cannot come in person, we appreciate our virtual Sangha as well. So thank you all for being here today. It's your presence and the joining of our voices in Nembutsu that makes the service so special for all of us. So I'd like to thank today our greeters, Claudia Cohen. The piano was played by John Skelly. The tech team today of Kwanye and Lily Johnson Sakai, and the they don't usually do it, but they did a great job today. Thank you, guys. And the flower arrangement was done by the Ikebana teacher, Junko Yamakawa. And there is a flyer outside that gives the time of her classes. It's a Ikebana flyer. And if you'd like to learn the wonderful art of Japanese flower arrangement, her classes are ongoing, usually the second, third, and fourth Saturday of the month. There are both morning and afternoon classes. And you can email ymkwjun@gmail.com for class schedule and registration. So, and we do very much appreciate the beautiful arrangements that she has been sharing with us for our service. Thank you very much, Sensei. It certainly adds to our enjoyment of our beautiful Naijin. I'd also like to thank Reverend Shobo Jaskula for a wonderful talk today about RENNYO. I think we all learned a great deal, and a great deal to consider on the history, not only of RENNYO, but of our own tradition. And I'd just like to share, when we went for Tokudo ordination, and we were always told to bow our heads when listening to the words of RENNYO. And there was something explicit in that, and implicit in that the reverence and gratitude for RENNYO's words are part of our tradition. And I so appreciated that at the time, and we can look on RENNYO-sama, who is here on the other side of Amida, along with Shinran, as part of our family, our teachers, our Senjishiki, in our own practice and our own experience of Jodo Shinshu. So again, Reverend Gary, thanks for sharing that today, and I'm so pleased that all of you could join us for RENNYO Shonin Memorial. So are there any announcements to be shared?
Yes, I have an announcement.
Thank you, Kwan.
Carl's Balls Takoyaki will be cooking from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at Japan Fest, the largest Japanese street fair in the United States and the first event of the year on Astor Place between Broadway and Lafayette Street. Carl and his team have been cooking at Japan Fest since 2015, and Carl is not only our temple caretaker of 10 years, but a legendary takoyaki chef featured on many different shows. If you can, visit him and his team as he needs our support in spreading authentic Osaka takoyaki and Japanese food culture all over the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. And it is quite delicious. So any other announcements? Yes. Next month in April, we will have our regular Shotsuki Hoyo service, and following that, we will have our Hanamatsuri service, which commemorates the birth of our historical founder of Buddhism, Shakyamuni Buddha. And for that festival, we create a flower shrine in which there is a baby Buddha statue, and that statue is bathed with sweet tea water. It's a lovely service, and we will have a very special guest, Reverend Kurt Rai, who is at present the minister of Ekoji Buddhist Temple, will be joining us to give us a special message. We're very much looking forward to welcoming him in person. So I hope you will join us at that time to meet him and hear his special message. So that's all for now. We look forward to greeting you next week at our next service. And again, thank you so much for joining us here today. And anyone who has not yet done Oshoko, incense offering, is welcome to do so at the close of the service. Please put your hands together in Gassho for our closing Nembutsu. In appreciation of your presence here today to honor RENNYO Shonin, the 8th abbot of our Jodo Shinshu tradition, the great-great-grandson of Shinran Shonin, without whom we wouldn't be here today sharing the Dharma. Thank you, RENNYO-sama, and thank you all for coming today. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you.